The November fog had swallowed most of Highway 17 by the time Harrison Veld realized he'd missed his exit. He wasn't the type to miss exits. Harrison Veld, CEO of Meridian Construction Group, had built a career on precision, on reading blueprints at midnight, on catching a misplaced decimal before it became a $1 million mistake, on never being the person in the room who needed things repeated. His assistant, Cora, had offered 3 times to drive him to the gala that evening. He'd declined 3 times because he always drove himself. He liked the control. He liked the silence. What he did not like was fog so thick it turned highway signage into suggestions. His phone had gone dark somewhere around the Barry interchange. The wireless charger in his Audi had been making a grinding noise for 2 weeks, and he'd told himself he'd get it looked at, and he hadn't, because there was always something more important. There was always something more important. He pulled off onto a county road he didn't recognize and sat for a moment with the engine idling, letting the heat push back against the cold November air bleeding through the windows. Outside, the trees were bare. The road was empty in both directions. The fog sat low and absolute, erasing everything past 30 feet. That was when he saw her. She was standing on the gravel shoulder with a small boy tucked against her side, one arm wrapped around him, the other holding a phone with a flashlight pointed uselessly into the white nothing. Her car, an old Civic dark blue, one taillight dimmer than the other, was pulled half onto the shoulder with the hazards blinking. She had no coat, just a burgundy scrubs top and dark pants, and the kind of exhaustion in her posture that Harrison recognized not from sympathy, but from muscle memory. He'd stood like that himself, in hallways outside conference rooms, when the numbers stopped adding up and the night had gone on too long. He slowed. He told himself he was just checking. He told himself he wouldn't stop if anything felt off. He stopped. He rolled down the passenger window and the cold came in immediately. "You need help?" She turned. Late 30s, maybe. Dark hair pulled back with a few strands loose around her face from the wind. She looked at his car, then at him, making the same calculation he'd made a moment ago. "My car won't start," she said. "I've been trying to get a signal for 20 minutes. My son has school tomorrow." The boy pressed closer to her. He was maybe 7 or 8. Wearing a puffy jacket that was doing most of the work keeping him warm. He looked up at Harrison with the particular wariness of a kid who'd been taught not to trust strangers but who was also very, very cold. "There's a garage in Coldwater," Harrison said. 12 minutes from here. I can drive you." She hesitated. He could see her thinking it through. Every reasonable thing a woman alone on a dark road tells herself about getting into a car with a man she doesn't know. "I can wait here while you call someone if you'd rather," he offered. "My phone charge is in the car. You can use it." That shifted something. She exhaled. "A ride would be better, if you don't mind. Just into town." "Get in," he said. "I'll take you." Her name was Audra Finch. She told him this after she'd buckled her son in and climbed into the front seat and sat with her hands clasped together in her lap, shoulders still carrying the tension of the last half hour on the shoulder in the fog. Her son was Luca. And Luca, once he was warm and moving, became deeply interested in the dashboard of Harrison's car and began asking questions about every button he could see. "That one controls the seat temperature," Harrison said. Luca stared at him. The seat. Why would a seat need to be warm?" "Luca," Audra said quietly. "It's a fair question," Harrison said. And it was. He'd never actually thought about it. "Audra worked at the hospital in Barry," she explained. "Emergency triage overnight shifts. She'd taken a county road to avoid the construction on the 400 and paid for it with a dead engine and no cell service." She said all of this matter-of-factly, without complaint, the way people talk about inconveniences when they've learned that complaining costs more energy than it's worth. He dropped them at the garage in Coldwater, waited while she made arrangements for the car to be towed and assessed in the morning, and drove her and Luca the rest of the way to her apartment on the east side of town before turning himself back toward Highway 17. He was 40 minutes late to the gala. He didn't particularly care. What he did think about, driving south through the clearing fog, was the boy's voice asking why a seat would need to be warm. The straightforwardness of it, the total absence of pretension. He thought about that for longer than made sense. Harrison did not sleep well as a rule, but he slept worse than usual that night. His calendar the next morning was stacked. 8 o'clock with his CFO, 9:30 site review, 11 a.m. Press call about the Simcoe County development. He was at his desk by 6:45 with coffee and the Q3 variance report, and by the time his assistant Cora knocked on the glass door at 7:58, He had already found 2 discrepancies his finance team had missed. "You have a call holding," Cora said. "Someone named Audra Finch. She says she has your number from—" Actually, she didn't say. She asked if you were the person who helped her last night on the highway. Harrison set down his pen. "Put her through." There was a pause on the line. Then her voice, steadier now than it had been on the road, more formal. "Mr. Veld. I'm sorry to bother you at work. I got your name from the garage in Coldwater. They had your card from when you paid the tow." He had paid the tow. He'd done it quietly when she was getting Luca settled in the car, and he'd figured she wouldn't notice until after, and that was fine. "It wasn't a big thing," he said. "It was to us. I wanted to say thank you properly, and to return the money. I can send it by e-transfer. Please don't." Another pause, longer this time. "You didn't have to do any of it." "No," he agreed. "But Luca asked me a very good question about heated seats, and I felt I owed him something in return." She laughed. It was a surprise sound, short and genuine. He found himself holding the phone slightly differently. "Well," she said, "thank you. That's all I wanted to say. You're welcome, Miss Finch." He meant to leave it there. He was good at leaving things there. "How's the car?" he asked instead. "Alternator," she said. "They can have it done by Thursday, it's fine. I can manage." He thought about the fog, about the scrub's top and no coat, about "I can manage," said in exactly the tone people use when managing is genuinely all there is. "If you need a ride before Thursday," he said, and then stopped himself, because that was not something Harrison Veld said to people he had known for less than 12 hours. "There are good car services in Barrie," he finished. "Cora can send you a number." "That's kind. Thank you." She hung up before he did. He sat looking at his phone for a moment, then pulled up the Q3 report and found a third discrepancy. He circled it in red. He told himself that was the more important thing. Cora sent the car service number. Audra Finch texted to say she appreciated it. Harrison was in 3 meetings before noon and in a 4th by 1:30, and he had no reason to think about her again. He thought about her twice more before the day was out. The second time was more difficult to explain. It was Cora who told him, 3 days later, with the careful neutrality she used when delivering information she suspected he wouldn't like. "The Coldwater garage called," she said. "They were trying to reach a Ms. Finch about her car. They have the wrong number. I think she may have given yours by mistake when she was signing the paperwork. They said the repair came to considerably more than the alternator. There were other things. They wanted to know if she's coming in." Harrison looked at her. "How much more?" Cora named a number. He looked back at his screen. "Call them. Tell them I'll cover the difference. Mr. Veld. She works emergency triage overnight. She has a 7-year-old. Tell them I'll cover the difference, Cora." Cora left without another word. She had worked for him for 6 years and knew precisely when to say nothing. What Harrison had not anticipated was Audra Finch arriving at the offices of Meridian Construction Group the following Thursday at 4 in the afternoon, asking to see him. Cora called back to tell him with the same careful neutrality as before, and something entirely different in the pauses between words. She was shown into the boardroom because Harrison's actual office was, frankly, embarrassing in its dishevelment, and he needed a minute to prepare himself for whatever this conversation was going to be. She walked in looking like she'd come directly from the hospital. She had, he'd later learn, same dark scrubs, same hair pulled back, same quality of tiredness worn so long it had become structural, but her chin was up and her eyes were direct. "You paid for my car," she said without preamble. Not angry, exactly, but clear. "The garage had an outstanding balance," he said. "A significant one, I noticed." She looked at him steadily. "I don't need a benefactor, Mr. Veld. I know that. I'm a capable adult. Then why?" He considered this. He was not, as a general rule, someone who said things like, "Because I couldn't stop thinking about how you were standing in that fog with no coat, and because your son asked me the most honest question anyone has asked me in 2 years. He was not someone who said those things. "Because I could," he said. "And sometimes that's enough of a reason." She looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted, not softening exactly, more like recalibration. "You have a strange way of operating," she said. "My CFO says the same thing." The corner of her mouth moved. "I'll pay you back, monthly, whatever I can manage." "I'm not arguing about that. I won't accept it." "Then we have a problem. We could disagree about it over coffee," he said, "if that would help." She blinked. He was moderately surprised at himself as well. The words had come out before he'd put them through the usual process. That is a terrible way to resolve a financial disagreement, she said. I know. I'm curious whether it will work anyway. She was quiet for a beat. Then, I'm off at 6. Coffee became dinner, because the coffee shop on King Street was being renovated, and the nearest alternative was a restaurant 2 doors down, and neither of them said anything about it. They ate pasta and talked for 2 hours, and Harrison could not, afterward, have recited a full transcript of the conversation, but he could have told you the specific way she tilted her head when she was deciding whether to say something, and the fact that she'd grown up in Sudbury, and that Luca was afraid of thunderstorms, and that she'd wanted to be an architect before she'd wanted to be a nurse, and that she'd chosen nursing because it put her closer to things that mattered right now instead of. He told her, about Meridian, about his father starting the Gint Hamilton, about the way Harrison Mortgage had taken in over at 31 when his father's health turned and he hadn't been ready, but there was no option to not be ready, so he'd been ready. She listened the same way she probably listened to patients, not waiting for her turn to talk, but actually receiving what he was saying. He drove her home. Luca was in bed. She stood at the building door with her key in her hand. This was strange, she said. Yes, but not bad. No, he said, not bad. He drove home thinking about the blueprint on his desk, and then about dinner, and then about the blueprint again. He got very little done that night. He did not see her again for 11 days, which was not for lack of thinking about it. Harrison Veld was deliberate about most things, and he was trying to be deliberate about this. He had a company of 400 people, a development project that was 4 weeks behind schedule, and a personal history with moving quickly toward things that felt right, which was that he didn't have one because he had always put the company first, and the company had not left much room. When he did see her again, it was not planned. He was at the Tim Hortons on Dunlop Street at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning, which was the only place near his office where he could get coffee without being recognized, and she was there with Luca before school, and Luca saw him first. Hey, Luca said, you're the seat guy. Audra looked up from her phone. Harrison paid for their order before he'd consciously decided to, and Luca accepted this with the breezy entitlement of a child who finds all good things entirely natural. And Audra looked at him with an expression that was partly exasperated, and partly something warmer than that. They sat for 20 minutes while Luca ate a Timbits, and explained to Harrison at length why his teacher was wrong about volcanoes. Harrison listened with complete seriousness. He offered one counter-argument. Luca considered it and said, actually that's pretty good with the magnanimity of someone who could afford to concede ground. After Audra walked Luca to school around the corner, she came back and sat down across from Harrison again and said, he doesn't warm up to people quickly. He's smart, Harrison said. He's right to be selective. She looked at him. Are you actually this measured all the time, or is it something you practice? Both, he said, honestly. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. I'm not looking for anything complicated, Mr. Veld, Harrison, he said, and neither am I. You're the CEO of a construction company. That's what it says on the building. That's complicated. My schedule is complicated, he said. I'm not. She studied him. He let her. Luca's father hasn't been around in 4 years, she said. Not as a warning exactly. More as information she wanted to put on the table before anything else ended up there. I understand, he said. I don't need Luca getting attached to someone who disappears. I don't disappear, he said. That's also not a boast. I just haven't found any reasons to stay before. The words landed. She glanced down at her cup, then up. That was a very direct thing to say. You seem like someone who prefers direct. I do, she said. It's a problem sometimes. Not with me, he said. She shook her head slowly, like she was trying to categorize something that kept refusing categorization. I have to get to work, she said. I know. I'm off Saturday. He said nothing. He waited. Luca has hockey in the morning, she said. He's terrible at hockey, but he loves it. He'd probably talk to you about volcanoes again if you were there. Harrison looked at her. I'll be there, he said. He was there. He sat in the cold arena on a Saturday morning with bad coffee from a vending machine and watched Luca Finch fall down 4 times and score a goal on his own net and celebrate it briefly before being told what had happened, and then celebrate it again anyway on the grounds that it still required skill. Harrison found this very funny. He didn't have a lot of occasions to find things very funny. He thought Cora would have been alarmed. After hockey there was lunch, and Luca chose the restaurant, which turned out to be a diner with laminated menus and a jukebox that still worked, and Luca spent most of the meal convinced he was going to pick the right song but never actually going through with it. Harrison gave him $2 in quarters and told him he had to commit. Luca played Dolly Parton and seemed surprised to find he'd made an excellent choice. Audra watched all of this from across the table with her arms crossed, and the particular expression of a person who was trying very hard not to feel something they weren't ready to name. Harrison knew the expression. He was wearing something similar. Walking to the car, Luca reached up and took Harrison's hand. Just like that, without announcement. Harrison looked down at him. Luca looked straight ahead. Harrison's chest did something he had no taxonomy for. He missed an important call that afternoon. He didn't notice until late evening. He called back, apologized, rescheduled for Monday. He sat on his balcony with a glass of wine after and watched the November dark over the city and thought about a 7-year-old taking his hand in a parking lot. He thought about his father at the kitchen table with blueprints spread everywhere, telling him that a building was only as good as what it was built on. Harrison had always thought that was about soil composition and structural grade. He was beginning to think it might be about something else. The thing that broke it was small. It always is. There was an event in December, a charity auction. One of the things Harrison's name was attached to because Meridian was one of the title sponsors, and he was the face of Meridian. Black tie, downtown Barrie, the kind of evening Audra had no reason to attend and every reason to find alienating if she did. He invited her anyway, because he'd decided he was going to stop managing the shape of things and let them become what they were. She came. She wore dark green and looked entirely herself, which was the only way she knew how to look, which was one of the things he was beginning to understand he'd been missing without knowing it. The trouble was a man named Douglas Fawcett. Harrison's former partner at Meridian, bought out 5 years ago. He's still present at events like this because his wife sat on the board of the charity. Douglas had 3 drinks in him and an old grievance he could never quite leave alone, and he found Audra standing alone near the silent auction tables and decided to be charming. Harrison saw it from across the room. He moved. By the time he arrived, Douglas had already said something Harrison couldn't quite hear but could read from the expression on Audra's face. Not hurt, but a very specific closed-off stillness he had learned to recognize as the face she wore when she was deciding whether to say something or let it go. "Doug," Harrison said. Douglas turned. The warmth on his face reset quickly into something practiced. "Harrison, nice evening." "It is. Thank you for being here." He placed a hand briefly on Douglas's shoulder, the way you redirect a conversation by redirecting a body, and nodded toward the bar. "I think they've opened the Reserve Riesling." Douglas took the exit because it was offered, and Harrison turned back to Audra. "I'm fine," she said, before he could ask. "I know," he said. "I seemed like a very interesting change of pace for you." She delivered this flatly. Harrison looked at her steadily. "Doug sold his stake in Meridian because he wanted to coast. I bought him out because I thought we could be more. He has never quite forgiven me for being right about that." She absorbed this. "I don't want to be your change of pace, Harrison." "You're not," he said. "You're the first person in a very long time who's made me question whether the pace was worth it in the first place." She looked at him. The room went on around them. Glasses clinking, a band starting up somewhere near the back, someone laughing at something. "That's a lot to put on a drive in the fog," she said quietly. "It wasn't the drive," he said. "It was the question about the heated seat." She laughed. He loved the sound of it. He was done pretending otherwise. They danced once, badly on his part, competently on hers, and she didn't let him lead as much as he would have liked, which was exactly right. He did not see her for a week after that. "Not from distance," she texted. He responded. They were both busy. This was real life. But something in him was very aware of the gap. It was Luca who closed it. A card appeared at the Meridian offices on a Wednesday, addressed in handwriting that was effortful and uneven in the way of someone who is concentrating very hard. "Dear Mr. Harrison, my mom doesn't say when things are hard, but I can tell. She looked happy last weekend. Thank you for dancing with her even though you weren't very good. Your friend Luca Finch, age 8. Harrison read it twice. He set it on his desk face up, which was something he didn't normally do with paper. Everything went into the filing system or the recycling, no exceptions, and looked at it for a while. He called Cora into his office. "Clear Thursday evening," he said. Cora looked at the card on his desk, and then at him, and said, with an extremely straight face, "Gladly." He brought dinner, not from somewhere impressive, but from the same diner where Luca had played Dolly Parton, because he'd remembered Audra saying she loved their soup, and he'd filed this information away without meaning to. He knocked on the apartment door at 6:30 with containers stacked carefully in a bag and Luca's card in his coat pocket. Audra opened the door in socks and a cardigan, her hair down for once, looking more like herself than he'd seen her. Or, maybe more precisely herself. He wasn't sure there was a difference. You brought the diner, as much of it as fit in a bag. Luca appeared at her elbow. He looked at Harrison and then at the bag and said, "Is that the soup?" "It is good," Luca said, and turned and walked back into the apartment. Audra shook her head. "He sent you a card." "He did. I'm going to have a conversation with him about privacy." "Please don't," Harrison said. "It was the best piece of correspondence I've received this year. And I receive a lot of correspondence." She stepped back from the door to let him in. They ate at the kitchen table, the three of them, with the television on low in the other room, and Luca narrating the soup with the detailed commentary of a food critic, and Audra's foot briefly, accidentally touching his under the table, and neither of them moving it. After dinner, Luca fell asleep on the couch with a book on his chest. Audra covered him with a blanket and came back to the kitchen where Harrison was washing dishes, which he'd started doing without thinking about it. She leaned in the doorway. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I'm aware." She was quiet for a moment. "You came all the way here on a Thursday. I cleared my evening, Harrison." Her voice was softer now. "You're making this very hard to hold at arm's length." He turned off the water, turned around. "I know," he said. "I'm doing it on purpose." She looked at him, the same look she'd had in the boardroom, but different, less calculating, more open, like she'd already made a decision and was deciding to be okay with it. "I'm not easy," she said. "My schedule is a disaster. I fall asleep at weird times. I'm terrible at asking for help. I have an 8-year-old who will absolutely interrogate you about geological phenomena." "I know all of this," he said. "I'm not looking for easy. I'm looking for real." She crossed the kitchen and she kissed him, which was not how he'd imagined it. Not cautious, not tentative. Just clear, like everything else she did. When she pulled back, she said, "You're still not getting the car money back." He laughed, which was also not something he did easily. "I know." December moved through itself the way December does when you're not watching it closely. The site on Simcoe County came in 2 weeks ahead of schedule because Harrison had fired 3 vendors and rehired 1, and the rest fell in line. Cora stopped scheduling Thursday evenings. Luca explained at considerable length why volcanoes were more interesting than earthquakes, and also why the diner's chocolate pie was superior to all other pies. And Harrison found himself in agreement on both counts. Walter, his father's old friend and the original counsel who'd helped Harrison through the acquisition years ago, came to town in mid-December and had dinner with Harrison and afterward said, over whiskey, "You seem different." "Different how?" "Less like a man trying to outrun something." Harrison thought about this. "I think I've stopped trying to outrun it," he said. Walter nodded, the way old men nod when they've been waiting for something to happen and it finally has. On Christmas Eve, there was a party at Meridian. The company's annual thing, formal but not stiff, everybody's families included. Audra came. She wore the same dark green from the auction, because it was the right dress and she was not someone who owned things she didn't use. Luca wore a clip-on tie that he was enormously proud of. At some point in the evening, Harrison found himself across the room from them. Watching, Luca explained something to Cora, who was receiving this explanation with enormous patience, and Audra laughing at something his VP of operations had said, entirely comfortable, and to herself, as if she had been here before. She caught his eye, tilted her head slightly, that thing she did. He walked across the room. "Everything, okay?" she asked. "Everything is very good," he said, which was for Harrison Veld a significant statement. Later the party had thinned and Luca was asleep in the boardroom on a stack of coats. Cora had organized this with the competence she brought to all things, and Harrison and Audra stood by the window looking out over the city. Snow was coming down in the soft, purposeful way of a Christmas Eve snowfall, the kind that knew it was being watched. "I keep thinking about that night on the highway," Audra said. "What about it?" "I'd been on that shoulder for 40 minutes before you drove past. A lot of people drove past." She paused. "You stopped. It seemed obvious," he said. "Most obvious things don't get done," she said. "That's the whole problem." He looked at her. "Do you want to know what I thought driving away that night?" "Tell me." I thought about Luca asking why a seat needed to be warm. He paused. I thought that was the most sensible question I'd heard in a long time. I've been boardrooms with very smart, very expensive people, and no one asks questions like that anymore. Everyone already knows everything, or pretends to. He looked back out at the snow. I think I'd forgotten that you can just ask. She was quiet for a moment. He's going to be insufferable when I tell him that. Please do tell him, Harrison said. He deserves to know. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. Harrison, she said. I'm glad your charger was broken. He looked down at her. That is the strangest thing anyone has ever said to me. Everything about this is strange. I know, he said. I think that's why it works. Below them, the street was white and quiet, the city wrapped in the specific stillness of a night that asks nothing and gives everything. Somewhere down the hall, Luca Finch slept in a pile of coats with absolute confidence that the world was a reasonable place. And Harrison Veld, who had spent 15 years building things designed to last, finally felt like he understood what the foundation was supposed to be made of.